Hello and welcome back to Dream, Declare, Deliver. I'm Chris Gorell, your host and author of Typhoon Honey and Learning to Feel. I have the great pleasure today of being with one of my very best friends, Linda Manning, who is a transformational coach and healer, along with a lot of other things. I really appreciate her energy and her knowledge and background. We're just going to be talking a little bit about how emotions play into our health and into our healing and things like that. So before we start, Linda, please introduce yourself if there's anything else that you would like to say.
I'm just glad to be here, Chris. I am looking forward to our conversation. Chris and I see each other on Zoom quite often,
Indeed.
but this is a real treat to have a longer period of time to talk,
Right.
and on one of my favorite topics.
So let's just start in with that. How, in your opinion, how do you see the relationship between emotional intelligence, emotional awareness, and healing and health? What do you see the connections being?
Oh gosh, there's so many. I mean, one of the things is that when we suppress emotions, and that's really common,
Mm-hmm.
people, especially there's certain emotions people have judgments around for themselves. Maybe they want to be seen as nice. And since they want to be seen as nice, they suppress anger. Or maybe they're really angry a lot of the time and they actually want to suppress their soft side. Like, who knows? It's different for different people. But
Mm.
suppressed emotions actually impact our bodies.
Well,
It's like we
sure.
it's
Yeah.
like we stuff them down, and by stuffing them down, you may feel it. In fact, very often when I'm working with people and they start talking about something, I'll say, "Where in your body do you feel that?"
Yeah. Yeah.
And they have these aha moments because they're like, I didn't realize it was in my stomach. Oh my God.
Mm.
Or my lower back, or, different places. So our health is, I believe, very directly impacted by either our ability to allow our emotions and allow them to flow freely,
Yeah.
or when we suppress our emotions, it can have a negative impact.
That's so interesting because I was just in a weekend retreat and we were doing a lot of body movement. The facilitator who was there was saying, when you move your body, you move your mind,
Mm-hmm.
and in doing some of these movements, there were a couple of times when people just had this overwhelming uh, venting of emotions. They started crying or sobbing or needed to yell or scream or something like that because something was coming up for them that they weren't really conscious of holding in their body until they started moving their body. And
Yeah.
so I think you're so right that we do hold these things when we suppress them. We hold them, in our bodies. And so it's important for us to have access to what's there through our emotional awareness.
Absolutely. And there's being aware, which is absolutely a critical step, even
Hmm.
knowing what your feelings are. But there's also accepting.
Yeah. Oh, that's so true.
So, because we can become aware, oh, I'm upset, but I don't want to be.
Hmm.
Instead of, oh, I'm upset, what do I need?
Yeah.
Like
What's it
when we can,
saying to me?
yes,
Yeah. What's
what's
that
it
upset
saying to
talking
me?
about? Yeah.
What's the message for me?
Hmm.
Like sometimes it's really good to be upset because upset means there's the I am is saying, I'm not okay with this.
Right.
And that can be really important. So it's not that we want to get rid of the upset, but we want to understand it. And that starts with accepting
Yeah,
and
I call it
accept.
embracing it. You're really,
Yeah.
like holding it, that this is something that is me as part of my being talking to me. It's always funny to have this type of a conversation because it feels schizophrenic to say I and me in the same sentences, but that is the way it occurs. There's the beholder, the I that sees myself, and then there's the myself that I am experiencing, or the emotions that I'm experiencing. And so it's kind of important for us to get in touch with who is the seer, who is that
Yes.
watcher, and that way I can observe and embrace and accept my feelings, because it's in me, it's in myself, and I can look at it and ask it, what's it trying to tell me? What are these feelings mean to me, and what's the meaning I'm taking that's causing them? Because
Right.
I also find that there's a lot of, we're not aware of often, but there's a thought behind every emotion, right before the emotion. And so getting to be familiar with embracing or accepting our emotions allows us then to look at, well, what was the thought
That's right. I've done a lot of like Byron Katie work, for example. I'm a big fan of
Mm-hmm.
her.
Yeah.
And that's all about investigating your thoughts, because your thoughts lead to your feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're having feelings that aren't working for you, you're distraught, you're anxious, you're whatever, it is so helpful to step back and say, well, wait, what am I thinking? And is that even true? Most
Mm-hmm.
of our thoughts actually aren't true. They just happen by rote. We're not even conscious.
Mm-hmm.
In
Right.
fact, neuroscience, I don't know if you want to go down the neuroscience path, I just find it fascinating,
Yeah.
has shown that when you think a thought over and over, the gap in your brain, the synaptic gap, gets smaller. So the
Mm-hmm.
more you think something, our brains are actually very plastic, very malleable.
Mm-hmm.
They're
Yeah.
not steady state. And so if we think something over and over, and the synaptic gap, this little area that the electric impulses have to jump over, gets smaller, that
Right.
means that you're even more likely to think that in the future
Exactly. It
without even
becomes,
having to do anything.
it's like
Automatic.
blazing a trail down through the woods. You're going to follow those blazes every time. And it's easy to recognize some of these, they're the conversations that come up when, like you're explaining to your friend, oh, I did this and this and this. And then, you have to tell that story. You always have to tell that story. And that's one of those synaptic paths, that, we've told so many times that we can't not tell it. It's
Mhm.
almost part of who of our identity, and even though it may even be um non sequitur, not really relevant to the current conversation, we're at that juncture point where that normal left turn or right turn or whatever it is in the synaptic path fires off, and we find ourselves having to tell that. So
And
come.
sometimes it's just super simple. It can be just that automatic, like, I'm such an idiot, right? If
Mm,
you make a wrong turn, you're like, oh, I'm such an idiot. And you might not even realize how often you say
yeah.
that to yourself.
Mm.
But every time you say that, you're sort of creating this pattern. So then that becomes your fallback
Ooh, yeah,
without
that's,
you even realizing it.
yeah. I have a friend I need to remind of that truth, that, that those old self beat up patterns,
Yeah,
that keep being repeated and repeated, then become the default mode,
exactly.
and produce that constant cycle of self beat up and negative emotions, and really being down on herself.
Well, and what it does is it creates the experience of truth with a capital T. I like to look at
Mm,
truth as like a big
I
T or
do
a
that
little t,
too.
right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
so truth with a capital T is, it is true that I'm an idiot. That is a fact. Instead of it, actually, it's not true.
Hmm.
Like, maybe we're all idiots at some point, but the real truth is we're much more complicated than that.
Yeah.
And maybe you were distracted in that moment, maybe something else was going on. But when we take these beliefs as the big T truth,
Mm.
that is when it's very hard to actually release them, because there's an attachment. It's like, no, this is the truth of me,
Hmm.
instead of, is this the truth of me?
Right. Oh, that's brilliant. Yeah. So how do you coach people on elevating that to a level of awareness so that they can do something about it?
So there's a lot of different techniques that I use, but certainly one of them, probably one of the main ones, is with questions, right?
Hmm.
Like, huh, how long have you been thinking that? Or can you think back to the first time? So sometimes I use questions like that to have them think about their
Hmm.
childhood, because very
Hmm.
often that's when those thoughts get embedded. And then I
Yeah.
might do some journeying, even where they get to talk to their young self. And my experience is that mostly what people want is love. They want love and kindness. And when we can create that for ourselves, like I'm an idiot is not a kind thing.
No.
And most people, the way they talk to themselves, if someone else ever talked to them that way, they'd be like, "Oh my God, that's an outrage.
Yeah. I
That
always
person's
say,
awful."
I often say that to a friend. I'll say, stop talking about my friend like that.
Yeah, yeah,
How dare you talk about my friend like that? And really, as a way of interrupting that pattern,
yeah,
because it's just a bad habit.
yeah.
To
That's great. I
continue.
love that. Yeah. So that's it, and just even the awareness in that
Hmm.
moment of like, oh, was I really being that mean to myself? And then we practice too, like, what does that part of you need? Does that part of you need a hug? Does that part of you need understanding? Like, what does it actually need? And then we try and give it that part of you that's being hard on yourself, like
Yeah.
giving it those moments of love or kindness.
And I often find that that is the mechanism that the person learned. It's kind of a maladaptive learning, but they've
Right.
learned that when they say I'm such an idiot or I'm a dope or anything, their friends chime in with, "Oh no, you're not, you're a wonderful person." And so they get this reinforcement to say it again, because every time they say something self-deprecating like that, their friends come to their rescue and say nice things about them. And we can do well by taking that middle section out and just saying nice stuff to
Right.
ourselves.
Right.
I'm not an idiot, I'm actually a wonderful human being.
Or sometimes it's the opposite, which is it's a preemptive strike. So I'm afraid that, in my family, they often called me an idiot. So I'd rather
Mm.
say it myself. Right. So it can go either way,
Oh yeah, yeah.
either as to get the opposite, or it can be, I'm going to prevent someone else saying it by saying it to myself first.
Right, right.
But either way, it leaves you feeling more empty and less, your real needs aren't being met.
Right. Yeah. And so that speaks into what is the need, that, what's going on there when we are able to embrace or allow our emotions. We can now have a conversation with that self, with that part of us that's in the emotion, and say, so what is, like you said, what is it that you really need? What is it that I want? What am I trying to get here? In terms of I think, what our fundamental need is to be loved.
Right.
And if we've learned these things from childhood, because as kids, we made up interpretations of stuff, especially if we were smart kids, like we were trying to figure out the world. So, we came to these assumptions that were never challenged, and again, and so they got put in place and then
Right.
practiced and practiced and practiced until they're like pretty solidly in place. And, we have to go all the way back there to undo that, and it just was the interpretation of a little kid.
We are by our nature storytellers. Human beings
Mm.
are storytelling creatures. And we love a story, and we don't like it when the story is only half. So we'll fill it in, right?
Really? Yeah,
Ending.
absolutely. Yeah, right.
So when we only understand part of the story, oh, mommy left daddy, okay, it must be because of me. Right? We only get half the story, so we fill it in,
We fill in the
often
rest, right?
wildly
Yeah,
correctly.
yeah.
And then we look for more evidence. That's the other thing, is that we're evidence seekers.
Hmm.
So we will look for evidence of our belief and discard evidence that's not that.
Right. How's
You know,
how true that is, that we just keep building up the evidence, to the point where it not only is self-affirming and it is reinforcing, but it disallows seeing anything else, because we have this massive pile of evidence, and well, that can't be right because it's not this.
right. Like my eldest child is really smart. There's no question about it. But whenever they are told that they're smart, their first thought is, oh, they're going to expect too much of me and I'll disappoint them.
Mm,
So they have this like visceral reaction whenever they're told they're smart. It's
right.
very
Right.
confusing as a parent, I can tell you, to know what to do half the time, because you're like, okay, I can't tell them they're smart, even though they are.
Hmm. Hmm.
And and then they look for that evidence of how they'll screw up. And of course, we all screw up sometimes, so that evidence is going to be there. But
Right.
then every time they do a good job, they ignore that evidence because it
Right.
doesn't fit in with the paradigm of who they are.
Yeah, so true. It's kind of like I remember when I was a kid, I was learning how to ride a bike, and me and my friends and I were on this hill, and the hill was, kind of an easy slope, not bad, but down at the bottom of the hill, it took a right turn, and at the corner there was an oak tree. So the other boys were saying, "Don't hit the oak tree, just steer away from the oak tree." Guess what? Bam, bent the rim of the tire and everything, because I just, steering and trying not to steer into to the oak tree. My momentum, my energy, and everything was going straight at that tree. So it's sort of the same way when we have these self beliefs, that I'm not really a smart person, or I do stupid things all the time. I keep tripping over my own shoelaces and things like that. To tell people not to think of those
Right.
actually reinforces it. It actually, like, don't think of an elephant right now,
Right. Exactly. What you're saying now, it made me think of something else, which is I very often ask people what they want. What's your vision or what do you want?
Hmm.
And I would say 95% of the time, people tell me what they don't want.
Right. Isn't that
Well, I
true?
don't, yes,
Yeah.
and it's really fascinating because, like you said about hitting the tree, if you focus your vision, your intention, your energy on what you don't want, guess what? You're going to get it.
You get that all the time. Yeah.
Right? And so it's really interesting. It's actually really hard for a lot of people to name what they do want and to focus there.
Hmm.
They're
Hmm.
constantly distracted by, you might get distracted by what currently is that's not what you want. Like,
Hmm.
so let's say I want to have a lot of money, but my bank account's not so big. So I'm putting all my energy focusing on how I don't have enough money. And guess what? My money doesn't grow.
Right. Right. So
Because
there's
it's hard. It's hard to focus on what we do want somehow.
Yeah, if I can geek out for a second on psychology, there's a part of the primitive brain, the inner brain, which nicknamed the reptilian brain, but it's
Yeah.
called the reticular activating system, and it's the thing that separates foreground from background, because there's so many zillions of things bombarding your brain. Your brain is processing everything that's going on in all of the body systems, your autonomic, nervous system, your breathing, your heart rate, all those kinds of things, plus all the stimuli from outside. It has to have some kind of switching device in there that says that's not important, this is important, that's not important. And it really evolutionarily came from survival. What's going to
Yeah.
eat me and what's not going to eat me? What can I eat? And when we are saying these things, like, I don't have money in my bank account, you're switching that RAS to focus on not having enough money.
Right.
But when we say, I live in abundance, and the world and the universe are abundant, and they always have what I need, the RAS switches over there. So it's not a matter that our thoughts manifest something else. It's really a matter of everything's there all the time, and we just haven't seen it because we're focused on what we think is the reality. We just need to
Right.
change our focus, shift that little internal system in our brain that's just a very primitive, it doesn't have much smarts to it. It's just very primitive survival. And so all we're doing is we're shifting focus of the RAS to something that says, money is everywhere. Money is abundant. I have a couple that's a friend of ours. One of them's a masterful salesman. The other one's a financial planner. I mean, she used to be CFO of a major bank, and I mean, she's really a money genius. And her husband is really good at sales and everything, but he has a belief that if I or anybody dropped money on the ground, I'd pick it up. So his belief is there isn't money laying about. Belinda, his wife, knows that money is abundant and is everywhere. And so when they were dating, he noticed that every time they went out, she would bend over, pick up, quarter here, a dollar bill, one time a $20 bill. And he says, you got to understand, if I lost a $20 bill, I'd go back and retrace my steps until I found it, Like, so his assumption is it's not there. Her assumption is money is everywhere. So she sees it everywhere. That's just the RES, the focus, that switcher thing. So, we've talked a little bit about how a lot of these things come from our youth. As we mature, how do we mature that emotional awareness then? What helps us grow that up?
One of the things, it's funny, I was thinking, I just had a coaching session with someone earlier this week, and he was talking about some of the things that frustrate him. And I said, why don't you let yourself have a tantrum? Like, just go to the bed and you go, I'm so frustrated with this. And then you can go back and do your work. So when you talk about mature, I'm like, is that mature or not? Maybe. But I actually feel like it is, because it's about intentionality. It's like, it's identifying the awareness. Oh, I'm getting really frustrated. And then it's taking an action to release it. He doesn't have to do a tantrum. He can do something else. But it's committing to yourself to take an action to change your emotional state.
What's actually even saying, giving yourself permission, like, I know this is a very childish thought. I'm just going to be childish about it. And then it'll be done with, I kind of get that done with. Now I can think rationally about it.
Right. But it's so much from self-acceptance. Instead of going, oh, I can't believe I'm having this thought. It's like, oh yeah, there's that thought of like, I don't want to do it. I just want to pout in the corner. So let me just like exaggerate, right? Like really pout in the corner, let myself own it. And, okay, now I can go on.
Right.
So I think sometimes it's that self-acceptance of all aspects of our emotions. And some of the ones that are the hardest for people to accept are around shame.
Yeah.
And when someone feels ashamed of something, how do they act? And when we can accept the thing that we're ashamed of, I'm working with someone now who's he grew up extremely poor. And so he had this idea in his mind of how much money he would make. And he's making money. He's not extremely poor, but it's not where he wants it to be. And he has shame around that. And it's like that very shame is preventing him from having real conversations with his wife about it, of looking for new jobs, of like freeing himself so that he can look for new possibilities.
Right. I think Brené Brown says that shame is perhaps the most violent thing that we can do to ourselves. It really classifies it as a violent thing, that it's so painful. It lives in this cluster. I forget which cluster of emotions. She has them all clustered together in her book, The Atlas of the Heart. But it's one of those really hard ones to deal with because it beats us so badly.
Right. Well, and shame often makes us not want to talk about something. And it's often through talking about it, whether it's with your friends or a coach or healer or whatever, but somebody who can normalize it.
Yeah.
That you're like, oh, okay, that thing that I was so ashamed about, like, it's just a thing.
Right.
And I don't have to walk around being ashamed of that. And I think, that's one example, but whether it's, your sexual relationships with people, whether it's your, how you feel about something, there's so many ways that we really judge ourselves harshly. And so I think part of maturing emotionally is with self-acceptance and self-love.
Right. And that plays into, again, something that Dr. Brown says is that, guilt and shame are not the same emotion. Guilt is, I did something bad. I did something that I didn't want to do. Shame is, I am bad.
Right.
And so the self-acceptance plays into healing that shame, that I'm not bad. I did something that I don't like and I'm not very proud of, and I can fix that. I can do something to make amends around that, but it doesn't make me a bad person. Fundamentally, I am a well human being. I'm a child of God. However you want to see yourself in a positive light, that's who I am. I am not what I do.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so distinguishing that shame as the, I am bad, as opposed to I did something bad, is I think an important first step in the process of healing and embracing ourselves, as we mature into our adulthood.
Yeah, I definitely agree, but I think guilt is another great one to look at.
Oh,
Right?
absolutely, right.
Because guilt could be I did something bad, or it could be I think I did something bad, right? They're not always the
Again,
same. And
right.
so sometimes someone feels guilty. I mean, I work with moms a lot, and I'm a mom, and moms are like professionals at guilt, right? It's
Right.
like part of the job description. And so, we think about like, oh, I should have paid more attention or less attention, or I shouldn't have like the shoulds around motherhood are like very extensive,
Mm-hmm.
and they're often contradictory. So no matter where you go, there's a good chance you feel guilty.
Right.
And so, but instead go, when you can get to this place of like, I don't know what the right thing is to do, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And I'm going to try something and see what happens, and like lighten up with the shoulds into experimentation, into let's see.
Yeah. And it ports back to, understanding that everything is an interpretation. I
Hmm.
often say to clients, you don't see with your eyes, you don't hear with your ears, you don't smell with your nose, you don't feel with your fingers. Your brain does that. All those other things are just neural receptors that are then processed by our brain. And our brain is, closed off to the outside. It just is, basing everything, all those assumptions based on what its experience, recorded experience is that it has in its, so kind of like data file, so
Yeah.
the brain learns by association. This is like that. And when we encounter some new situation, the first thing we try to do is say what it's similar to in our experience. We may not say that out loud, but that's what's going on inside of our meaning making system. So when we do something that we don't like, do something that's, we would call wrong or something like that, the interpretation comes not from some moral standard out there. It comes from our own self evaluation. That's not what I want to do. And the thing that's important to remember, I tell people, the thing that is important to remember is you would not know of that as wrong unless you already knew what you believed in as right. So you can't judge yourself as bad if you don't know what right is, and therefore it must live inside you. It's
Yeah.
already
Right.
there. Let's just start embracing that goodness in you instead of constantly beating yourself over the head with some judgment about, well, this wasn't quite exactly the way good is supposed to be or the way I wanted to be, and so on. And so we end up making a judgment about that feeds into that whole self-concept again, about who I am and what I am. I'm such a terrible person and stuff.
Yeah. Another thing I've been thinking about a lot lately too is around sort of is your cup full or is your cup empty? And I don't
Mm,
mean the half full, half empty. I mean, when people are getting enough sleep, when they're
mhm.
getting nutritious food, when they have had some quiet time to themselves or
Yeah.
social time, whatever they need, then it's so much easier to actually be more observant instead of caught in the emotions.
Hmm.
Some
Hmm.
of these concepts that we're talking about require a level of maturity, but they also require a level of um, like having your basic needs met.
Right. Yeah.
And when we're hungry or we're tired or we haven't had 2 minutes to ourselves or we're over giving, any of those kinds of things, then when we try to look at our emotions more objectively, it's just really hard.
Yeah.
And
That's
so I think self-care is also a part of maturity.
hmm
When we realize that we deserve self-care, when we give it to
right.
ourselves,
Right.
when we give ourselves that 5 minutes of quiet instead of feeling we need to take care of somebody else right away.
Hmm.
Those are
Hmm.
these little building blocks
I'm
that
glad you
help.
said I'm glad you said 5 minutes of instead of like a 2 hour session or something like that. It these things that that are self-care things, food, and nutrition, sleep and things like that are all easy to administer, and often just small amounts do wonders for us. I don't have to have a big long nap. I can crash out for 5 minutes and be refreshed. If I take away all the noise and all of the interfering pieces, and just allow myself to sink into relaxed rest, and that's so refreshing. It resets the button right away. So it's not, we often mistake, I think, self-care for, spa days and, going for a long hike in the woods, or, and yes, those are wonderful things. I don't want anything wrong with them at all. Do it, do it. But, sometimes self-care is as simple as, the healthy choice for an apple instead of a candy bar, you
That's
know
right. That's
and
right. It can
and
be
just
very
giving
simple.
yourself the right nutrition. Both of them have a kind of sugar in them for an energy lift, but one is much more bioavailable, in fructose, than the pure cane sugar that's in the candy bar. So it's knowing those kinds of things and knowing how to keep yourself in the care for yourself and stuff like that. I promised you that we would keep it to about 30 minutes, and we're up at that time zone. I would love to continue, our conversation, because, we're obviously in the same channel, and really see a lot of things the same way. But, any last thoughts on emotional maturity and how we're able to really heal ourselves by being far more aware? Anything you would like to add to close
Um,
out?
I mean, honestly, I think we've covered a lot of it, but no matter what is going on in your day, if you can pause and just give yourself a breath of kindness, like, if I were an amazing, valuable person, which by the way you are, like,
Right. Right.
oh, how would I treat myself? How could I just breathe some love into my heart, and or, be in that place of gratitude? How do I just look around and find something to be grateful for? Because those are all things that shift us on the emotional scale.
Right.
And any shift up on the emotional scale helps helps rebalance us from some of
Mm.
the more negative. So we want
Yeah.
to rebalance that with some of the positive.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Linda. I know you're busy. I know you're between two engagements here, and thank you for coming to us from your car. And I just love how we were able to fit this in. So again, have a wonderful day. And that's it for this session. Come back again to Dream, Declare, Deliver, and we'll talk about some more things around emotional intelligence.